Welcome quilters to the January how-to video for the 2026 monthly color challenge. This month our colors are the olive, and I'm going to be using the pistachio for the light and the pine for the dark. However, for this block they are used exactly the same amount. If you've decided to use the same background color throughout the challenge this year, you're going to grab baggie number 1 for the background, and as I'm going through the how-to for cutting out the colors, I will let you know which colors you're going to be cutting out. All right, let's go make this block. Welcome monthly color challenge quilters to the January how-to video, our very first video for the 2026 monthly color challenge. This month our color is this olive green, and I'm starting out with the background fabric. So if you are following along this year and you are using the same background color throughout, you're going to want baggie number 1, and you should have them all cut out. But now on the instructions you will see where you will need to mark the diagonal on a few of those squares. So I'll be going over that as well, but first we need to go through the cutting. Now you can see my fabric is not straight, right? We have a lot of extra as I've straightened out my fabric because I want my grain line to be correct. And when we're talking about accuracy in quilting, we want our fabric and our grain line to be as straight as possible. Sometimes that's not always possible. If I need a 9 or 8.5 inch cut, and my fabric, and I have a 1/4 yard of fabric, and this is what it looks like, honestly, I'm going to go ahead and pull this over, and I'm going to straighten it out, and I'm going to use what I need to use because I need that fabric, right? But I have a little leeway with the measurements that we have right now that we're using for this block. So I am going to go ahead and straighten out my fabric. And to do that, I am lining up the selvages, and I want to grab both edges, and we're just going to kind of, it's going to be hard to show you on with this angle. We're just going to kind of go back and forth with this until we have a straight line. So we see we're still off a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm holding the middle of the fabric here just to give it a good middle hold, and I'm just bringing this fabric either up or down depending on what I need to do for the bottoms to line up. Okay, so now this back side is off. I'm going to pull that fabric up, so we're going to pull it up this way a little bit. I need to do a little bit more. And usually, and you do this with the larger piece of fabric as well. And usually I have it up, and I'm kind of going back and forth like this, and I'm looking at the bottom as it hangs. But just to kind of give you an idea of how this works, we're doing it on camera and as well as I possibly can to show you what. All right, so it's now you can see our selvages line up really nicely. So that's going to give us our nice straight edge on our fabrics here. Our grain line is going the right way. Now we're going to go ahead, cut ourselves that straight edge. So we're going to line up on the ruler. I want my fold on the line, and then we are going to trim off as little as possible since we have such a large piece that we have to cut off. I know it seems like a waste, but you could cut out some 1-inch squares here if you wanted to use later to throw into your scrap bucket. We want to cut off as little as possible here, but this fabric does kind of bend in. So I have it a little bit off of the 12-inch mark. Oops. And so if I line up my ruler on that 12-inch mark, you can kind of see it does kind of curve in here. So I want to make sure I get all of that trimmed off and that we have this nice straight edge to start with. So go ahead, trim that off. Now we have a nice straight edge for our cuts, and that is going to really help with our piecing and our accuracy with our blocks. So it's very important to start off with a straight edge. You would do the same with a fat quarter. Usually that's what I work with. This year I have quarter yards. I have actually made the 2024 January block is right now, it's free on PayHip. I will have that link down in the comments for you, or in the description for you, so you can go ahead and go download those instructions. There's a how-to video in the instructions that you can watch that shows you how I cut a fat quarter. Now, it's not the same block, so don't follow those cutting instructions, but you can kind of see how I cut the fat quarter if that's what you're working with this year's fat quarters. Okay, so now our first cut for the January block is going to be a 4-inch cut, and I'm going to go ahead and line up my ruler. We're going to line up the mark of our ruler. We're going to line it up on the fabric. We're not going to line it off. We're not going to line it off here and push our ruler up to the edge of the fabric and have it off of the fabric. We want it on the edge, along the edge of the fabric, but we want it on the fabric. That's going to give us just a couple of more fibers to work with as we are sewing, which again is going to help with our accuracy. And for this block, that is all we're going to need from this strip. So I'm going to go ahead and set this aside. We'll take this and rotate it. We will need to do the same thing, give ourselves that straight edge. So we're going to cut off the selvage, and we have a thicker selvage here and a thicker selvage here. So I'm going to go ahead and look at sometimes the selvages have some holes in them. I'm going to go with those marks to make sure that's what I'm trimming off. And then you want to make sure your fabric is on the ruler lines. That's just going to make sure you have a nice straight edge here. I'm going to switch to a smaller ruler. We'll go ahead and trim that selvage off. All right, our first cuts are going to be 4-inch squares, and we need 4 of those. So we're again lining that ruler up just right on the edge of the fabric, not off of the edge. It's still along here, but it's on that fabric. We're going to make 2 cuts for those. Okay, now it says to mark the diagonal. We're going to do that next. We're just going to keep our fabric and keep cutting as we go along here. You do not need to move your fabric, just leave it as is and keep going. I'm moving it because the lights shine on my rulers and it makes it hard for you to see. So keep your fabric where it is on your mat and just keep cutting along. So our next cuts are going to be 3.5 inches. So we're going to line up the 3.5 inch. We're going to leave it this width at 4 inches. We're going to find our 3.5 inch mark, making sure that our ruler lines are here so we are nice and straight. We need 2 3.5 inch cuts because we need 4 squares here. So we'll make those 2 cuts. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead, rotate, and we're going to trim these down to size so that we have that 3.5 inch square. So now I'm not using the mat at all, and I'm not using it when I'm cutting these squares. I'm just using my ruler. Again, that's important for your accuracy because your mats do stretch and warp. They get used a lot. Hopefully they get used a lot and they get worn out. So we want to use our rulers as much as possible for our cutting and to keep our accuracy. And it is important, you know, you would think that measurements would be all the same with our rulers, but they do kind of differ from ruler to ruler. So it is helpful to keep the same rulers if you can. All right, our last cut is going to be 1 3/4. So I'm going to just make one cut at 1 3/4 from this 4-inch strip. Again, lining up my 1 3/4 inch mark here. And we'll go ahead and cut. Okay, we'll set this aside. And we'll go ahead, rotate this, and we need 4 1 3/4 inch cuts. So I'm going to just go ahead and take those from here. Okay. Alrighty. So here is our background fabric. Again, you should have these in baggie number 1 if you are doing the same fabric for the background throughout the year. So you should have 4 4-inch squares, 4 3.5-inch squares, and 4 1 3/4 inch squares. So for right now, you can set aside the 3.5 inch, and we are going to mark the 4-inch and the 1 3/4 inch squares. Say that fast. We're going to mark those on the diagonal. All right, my favorite marking tools: my marking mat, my ruler, and just a mechanical pencil. So my marking mat is just an old cutting mat that I have cut and broken into different pieces. So I use this one for marking. Obviously, a lot of marking has been going on in my world. And then I use the other pieces for trimming. That helps this board last a little bit longer. So if you wonder what to do with your old mat when you have to finally replace it, cut it into quadrants, flip it over, and use it for marking and for trimming. So we'll go ahead and go over just quickly for those of you who are new to quilting. We're going to go over marking. So you're going to mark the wrong side of your squares, and you'll go ahead, and I'm going to move this over. There we go. You're going to go ahead and line up your ruler so that it is just off the side of your points. You don't want to line it up exactly. We want to line it off to the side just a little bit. That's going to give you a little bit of wiggle room for the width of your marking tool. And that way your line will be right in the middle of your points. So we're going to line up just off to the side a little bit, not much. And we'll go ahead, draw that line. And now you can see, hopefully, you can see that we have right through the middle of our points. You're going to do that for the 4-inch, and you're also going to do that for the 1 3/4 inch. So again, we're just going to line up just to the side of those corners, of those points, and just a quick line through each one. All right. Once you have marked your diagonal on your squares, we're going to move on to the main color. So this is going to be our light olive green. This time I have found the straight grain of my fabric, and it's not quite as bad. So I don't have to trim off as much of the fabric as I did with our background. So I'm going to still do that though. I don't want to start off with a wavy edge. You can see that even though it still looks really good, there is a lot of difference here in the middle and the ends. So we're going to still give ourselves that straight edge by trimming this off. Now our cuts are going to be the same. We are going to first make that 4-inch cut. Set aside our extra. And we will rotate. Now we're going to line this up on the mat just to make sure we are straight. I could, if I wanted to, go ahead and trim off my selvage and go ahead and cut it this way, but I want to make sure when I trim my selvage off that I'm giving myself that straight edge right from the beginning with this laid out on my mat, and my lines are parallel and perpendicular and all of that good stuff. So we'll trim off this selvage here. And now go ahead and do our cuts. So we have 4-inch squares again. And each cut has on there, if it is for a special unit, it'll have it at the end. So these 4-inch squares, it says 4-inch squares for HST, and those are at the top. They are listed. They tell you what those acronyms are for. So the HST is half square triangles. Now we need 4 3.5-inch squares, and I'll go ahead and move this again so you aren't looking at that ring light, which is good for lighting when you are in the basement, but not so good when it's on your ruler. So we need, again, 2 3.5-inch cuts, and then we will rotate those and trim them down to 3.5-inch squares. Now these do not have a special marking because these are going to be used for a unit, but not a unit that has a special name, at least not that I know of anyway. So it just has them as 3.5-inch squares. And then we need one more cut at 1 3/4. Oh, came apart a little bit because I moved it. And that happens when you move your fabric. The edges will come apart a little bit, so you want to make sure your edges come back together if you do have to move it. But again, if you don't have to move your fabric as you're cutting these down the strip, don't do that. Just leave it as it is and make the cuts where it sits. All right, that's extra, so we'll set that aside. We'll rotate this and get our 4 1 3/4-inch squares. If your background is really dark and your main is lighter and you want to mark the main fabric instead, you would just mark the 4-inch and the 1 3/4-inch squares just like you would with the background. Because sometimes if you're going with like a black background or like a really dark navy blue or something like that, and you don't want to mark those, you go ahead and mark the main. It doesn't matter for these blocks. If you do have a dark background and you would like to mark the background, my favorite marking tool for dark is this pen, and I'm probably going to say it wrong. It's Bohin France. I will put an affiliate link down in the description, and you can find out more information for this. It is a pencil. I said pen, but it is a pencil, and it has refillable lead, but it gives a nice thin mark just like a mechanical pencil, but it shows up really nicely on the dark. Let me find a strip. So here I'll show you quick. So if this was the back, you can see it shows up really nicely, and you can mark your diagonals and your stitching lines if you need to on the back side of your fabric, and it shows up and you can see it. Okay, so our next step is going to be sewing our half square triangles first. To do that, we are using our 4-inch squares, our background and our main. You're going to sew right sides together with our marked diagonal on the top. You're going to sew 1/4 inch on both sides of that drawn line. We will cut on that drawn line, we'll press, and then we will trim these to size. We'll go do that first, and then we will move on to the next part of the block. Okay, so we have pressed our half square triangles, and we are ready to go ahead and trim. We're going to trim these down to 3.5, and there are many specialty rulers out there that you can use. I prefer Deb Tucker's Tucker trimmer. It's the Studio 180 design from Deb Tucker. And I like her rulers above all for trimming. But I'm going to show you with a regular ruler because we don't all have them and they work just fine. So I have a 6.5 inch square ruler that I'm going to use. You can use the long 24.5 if that's what you have. The other ruler that I use a lot is the 12.5 by 6.5. Also a great ruler. If you have the 6.5 by 6.5, I like this one for trimming just because there is less ruler to deal with because you're already having a lot to do with your numbers and your trimming and all of that. And I just don't have the brain space to deal with lots of extras. So the less ruler you have to deal with, I think the better. So first step is to line up your diagonal on your ruler with your seam. We're going to line that up and then we want to make sure we have fabric around the outside, not just the outside of our ruler, but the outside of our 3.5 inch line as well. And because we are sewing and we have fabric and it moves and whatever, sometimes you will have a lot of fabric and sometimes you will have a little. We just want to make sure we have fabric around the outside so that we can trim. And sometimes, honestly, I will have no fabric. It'll be right on the edge of what I am trimming. And I just go with that because it's fabric and we will make it work, right? So next step, we're gonna, again, match up our diagonal on our seam. We're going to now take our 3.5 inch line on our ruler and we are going to put it on the edge but also on our fabric, just like when we were cutting to start with our squares and our rectangles. We're going to have our line on our ruler. It's going to be on the fabric. It's on the edge, but it's on the fabric, not off of it. And we're going to go ahead and trim that. All right, so we'll do that one more time. So we're going to line up our ruler with the diagonal on the seam allowance. We are looking to make sure we have a little bit of fabric on the outside of the 3.5 inch mark and the ruler. And we will go ahead and trim. I like how that decided to show you exactly what I was talking about, how there's just nothing there to trim on this one. And I also, as I'm doing this, that was a point I wanted to make as well. So we're lining up on the diagonal and lining up the 3.5 inch ruler mark on the fabric. For those first cuts, you do want to line it up so you're trimming off as little as possible. So when you're taking this square and you're lining this up, you've got your diagonal, you're making sure you have fabric all around. You want to trim off as little here and have a little bit more on the outside as you can, because as you trim, sometimes the ruler slips, your rotary cutter slips, something happens. If you're just taking off a little bit, you have a little room for error. So you can, if it slips and your ruler kind of goes like this, that's okay. You can come back, move it down a little bit, and you still have fabric you can trim. So for that first cut, really try to look at trimming off as little as possible, just in case. And that way, when you flip it, you can trim off as much as you need to. It's not a big deal, but you just give yourself a little bit of wiggle room in case something slips. So go ahead, trim up all of your half square triangles to 3.5 inches, and then we will go ahead and move on to the corner blocks. We'll stitch those up and we'll talk about those. Our next step is to make our corner blocks, and I forgot to have you mark your squares. It is in the instructions. I just didn't follow my own instructions. So the small 1 3/4 inch squares of your color, your main fabric, you want to draw a diagonal on the wrong side of the fabric, just like you did on the 1 3/4 inch squares on your background. Okay, so both sets of these small squares, you are going to mark on the diagonal. we're going to go to the sewing machine and we are going to sew on the diagonal. So for this block, let's see, I'll show you on this one because I think we can see the line a little better. We're going to sew with the diagonal going this direction, so make sure your diagonal is going the right direction. You're going to sew on that line, and actually when I sew on a line, because we're making a block where we're going to be pressing over, I'm actually going to sew like one stitch, one thread width over from the line towards that outside. So I'll go over that a little bit more and then I'll show it to you as well when I'm done stitching. But we're just going to stitch like right next to that line, because then when we come with our iron and we press, we're kind of, even though the thread is thin, you know, it does take up space. It adds a little bit of width to our fabric, and then it kind of messes with how our corners come together. And so if we just go right next to it and then we come and we press, now we get right, we're pressing right on that line and we get a nice corner. So I'll show you a little bit more at the machine and then I will show what it looks like afterwards. So we'll go do that. We're going to go ahead, sew, we will press, then we will trim that excess, and then we'll be ready to put our block together. All right, we're going to sew these corner blocks. So we just want to line up our corners or line up our squares, sew on the diagonal, and that's it. It does not matter which corner because these can all be turned. I'll go ahead, and again, like I mentioned, we are sewing just next to that line towards that outside edge, so that when we come in and press, we will have a nice triangle. And we'll just keep doing this. So we have 4 of our main large squares with 4 small background, and then we have 4 large background squares with 4 main small squares, and we will just sew all of them the same. All right, so next we're going to take it over to the pressing station. We'll press and then we will trim, but I want to show you. So it's very hard to see, but I've sewn just along that line, almost right on it. And then when I go to press, now I've got this beautiful edge right there that is even, because by stitching just a tish alongside the line, not right on it, I am taking into account that that thread has a little bit of width to it, and when I fold it over, instead of having that width taken up right on that line, it folds over that width and gives me a nice straight edge. So we'll go press and then we will trim these off, and we are ready to put our block together. So we have our corner blocks. They've been stitched, they've been pressed and trimmed, but I'm going to trim one more for you. But again, just going over how that stitching makes a difference. So you can see I stitched along that line, and here I kind of got away from it a little bit more than I wanted to. So now I've got kind of a little edge coming out here. That's how much a difference that makes when we are stitching those lines. So it you know, just take a minute to, obviously I did not, but take a minute to just make sure that you are stitching those accurately, because it does make a difference when you are putting these together. So to do that, to trim, I just kept talking right through it. I've lined up my 1/4 inch on my ruler. I lined that up on the stitch line and then just trimmed off that excess. And now we are ready to start laying out the pieces of our block. So we have our corner units and then we have our half square triangles. So we're going to make 2 of each block, and because we have a light and a dark basically. So we have, splitting these up, we are going to use our half square triangles and our corners, and our half square triangles, even though they're the same, are going to be used differently. So I'm going to do the top left spool block first, and then I'll lay out the top right one. So the first one has our half square triangle laid out this way. And then we are using the corner blocks with the main fabric, the large main fabric square. And we will go ahead and lay those out like that. And you'll make 2 of those. And then the right corner has our half square triangle block with the main color going in. And it uses the background, large background color, the large background square for the corner blocks. All right, so we're gonna sew those together. You're gonna make 2 of these as well. And I love these spool blocks just because they're so easy to make. And they just look so sweet. We are gonna go ahead, sew these, and then once we have these complete, then we can go ahead, turn them the way they need to be turned, place them where they need to be placed, and they will be good. So I'm going to take them over to the sewing machine by turning over the right hand side over the left hand, because this is going to be the side that I'm going to sew. And so I know as I stack these that I am going to be sewing on that side. So if you are a new quilter, welcome to our craft. As you make more and more blocks and more quilts, you're going to find what works best for you. For me, folding these over, stacking them up as so, and knowing as I go to the machine that this is the side I'm sewing helps me keep that organized. So I'm going to go sew those and I'll press and then I'll be back. Okay, so just really quickly, and I wanted to go over just making sure that you remember to watch the pressing arrows in the instructions, because when we put these together, we're going to want those seams to nest up really well. So we're not pressing these blocks the same way, even though they're pieced the same way, they're pressed differently. And the first part of that means that these are going to go together. These seams are going to nest together really well. So to pin, you're going to flip those over. You're going to nest those seams in together like this. You can just feel them, they stick right in there. You're going to take a pin. You're going to go down on the right. You're going to come up on the left. And you are going to then, as you sew, you'll be sewing on your machine. You just come along. You're going to take 1 stitch over this seam. And when that needle is down, you're going to pull your pin, because now that seam is locked in place, and then you'll continue sewing. And that way you're not sewing over the needle, and you aren't sewing over the pin. You aren't throwing off your timing on your machine or anything like that. You aren't breaking your needle or bending the pin, and we're not messing with our machine, but your seam is still locked in place and you get that nice point. So again, you're just going to fold that over, nest that seam up. You can feel it just kind of lock right in there. Okay. You're going to take a pin, go down on the right, come up on the left side of that seam, and now it is locked in place. So we'll do that for both of them, and then we will put this block together. We are so close to our January block being done. All right, so we are going to put this thing together. Now I'm going to do the exact same thing that I do when I put blocks and units together. I'm going to take from the right and flip over to the left. And I'm also going to pin because our seams, if you followed those pressing instructions, are going to nest up really nicely. So we're going to pin down on the right, come up on the left of that seam. And I'm going to turn it so I know that my seam that I'm sewing is on that side again, and down on the right and up on the left of that seam, and again turning it so that I know this is where I'm sewing, top and bottom. All right, we are so close. And we have one last seam, and hopefully our seams are all pressed the right direction and we can line all 3 of these up. So we're just going to nest them up, just feel them lock right in. Some of these seams are going to be a little thicker than the others, but that's okay. We're just going to go over them slowly and carefully with our machine. But that's another reason to pin from the right and come up on the left so that you can take one stitch on this thick seam and take that pin out, and then you don't have to worry about trying to keep that seam in place but also miss the pin. Now you can just sew and not have to worry about that. One last seam. And that's wrap on January's block. January Monthly Color Challenge quilters. I hope you enjoyed making this block. It's the first block of 12. It's going to be an amazing year full of color. Please let me know if you have any questions now or anytime throughout the year. You can email me at jen@patternsbyjen.com and join the Facebook group Quilt and Learn with Patterns by Jen. I'll link that down in the description. I will see you there. I will see you February 1st for the next block. Go make something you love.